Do the police really cover for their families? A netizen said, my son got into a prestigious university, so I gave him $10,000 as a reward. He took the money and didn't come home all night. Early the next morning, he suddenly called me. Dad, help me. I don't want to go to jail. I was shocked and quickly asked my son what had happened. He stammered for a long time and then gave me an address. It was a hotel. My wife and I rushed to the hotel room, and there we saw a girl lying face down on the bed, naked and motionless. My son was squinting in the corner, pale-faced. Dad, it's not what you think. I didn't. My mind went blank, and I clenched my fists. My wife rushed to protect our son. Baby, don't be scared. Your dad is a police officer. You won't get into any trouble. I was almost losing my mind. Are you still defending him at a time like this? He killed someone. Tears welled up in my wife's eyes. So what? He is still our flesh and blood. I lost my temper completely. Tell me everything that happened, and don't lie. My son nodded vigorously. Her name is Sophia. She's my girlfriend. Last night, they were celebrating together. After drinking some alcohol, Sophia suggested they go to the hotel to rest. She was in a bad mood because she didn't do well on the exam and thought she could never get into Cambridge. But she didn't want to break up with me. I kept comforting her, and then we did it. Afterwards, Sophia suddenly demanded that my son give up Harvard and accompany her to repeat a year of studies. I refused, and Sophia threatened to accuse me of rape, saying Harvard would never accept a rapist. I kept begging her, but she picked up her phone to call the police, so I had to cover her face with a quilt, and then she suffocated. I turned over Sophia's body. Her eyes were still open, her pupils contracted in despair, staring straight at my son, who was huddled in the corner in fear. I carefully examined her. The cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. There were no strangulation marks or tattoo spots on her neck, indicating it was not intentional murder. There were signs of sexual intercourse, minor tears, no binding marks on the wrists, and no skin fragments under her fingernails from struggling, which meant it was not rape. I checked the surveillance footage at the front desk. The two of them were chatting and laughing when they entered, indicating Sophia was indeed willing. But even if my son was telling the truth, Sophia was dead, and the judge wouldn't care whether Sophia threatened him or not. This case would definitely be judged as manslaughter, and my son would go to jail. The only way out now was to actively compensate Sophia's family and get a letter of understanding to reduce his sentence. I handed my phone to my son. Now call 911. You must make this call yourself. Confession is an important part of reducing the sentence. My wife snatched the phone away. Are you crazy? If our son goes to jail, how will he go to Harvard? He absolutely cannot confess. Then what do you want me to do? This is a homicide. Killing someone requires paying with your life. My wife suddenly knelt down and clung tightly to my leg. Honey, I beg you, you've been a detective for over 20 years. You must have a way out. He is our son. If you don't help him, who will? I was restless, my eyes scanning the room until I noticed something. With that, I might be able to help my son get away with it. After setting up the scene, I had my son call the police. 15 minutes later, the on-duty detective arrived. It was James, my apprentice. Seeing me, James quickly bowed. Master, why are you here? With Jack doing so well, you must be overjoyed. I sighed inwardly. What's the use of good grades? I'd rather he be a harmless, ordinary person. James, today, I am not a police officer, but the father of a suspect. Please carefully investigate the scene and determine if there is any suspicion of murder. James thought I was joking, but when he saw Sophia's body, his expression instantly turned serious. He carefully examined the body, confirmed the cause of death, estimated the time of death, and then started questioning my son. My son recited the statement. I taught him word by word. Sophia is my girlfriend. We drank a lot last night, and she couldn't handle her liquor, so she fell asleep first. Before sleeping, she asked me to help her apply a face mask. I was taking a shower at that time. After I finished, I applied the face mask for her, and then went to sleep. When I woke up this morning, she wasn't breathing. I didn't dare touch the body because I was afraid of destroying the scene. So I called my dad first and then called the police. James, I really didn't do anything. You must believe me. My son grabbed James' sleeve, tears streaming down. I glared at him, reminding him not to overact. James fished a dried up face mask out of the trash can and examined it for a moment. How many face masks did you apply to her? One. But there are 2 face masks here. Who used the other one? My son shook his head. This morning, I found 2 face masks on Sophia's face. I don't know why, but I only applied one. James put the 2 face masks into evidence bags and handed them to the forensics team to extract fingerprints, then ran over to ask me, Master, let me explain my reasoning, see if it's right. James, please remember, right now I am the suspect's father. I shouldn't be involved in this case. Oh, come on. If you're not involved, who in our squad would dare make a decision? Besides, with your character, if Jack really committed a crime, you'd be the first to kill him. I sighed inwardly. Kill him? That's my son. I think this case is an accident, not murder. The reason being, the victim had 2 face masks on her face. This means that before Jack applied the mask, the victim had already applied one herself. But Jack probably didn't notice. The face mask has good sealing properties, containing a lot of water and collagen. Therefore, many factors cut openings around the mouth and nose for breathing. However, the second mask Jack applied covered the breathing breathing holes of the first mask, causing asphyxiation. Given that the victim was already in a drunken slumber, this led to suffocation. Great. James had walked right into my trap. I found several face masks in Sophia's handbag, so I applied one to her face and dried it with a hairdryer, faking an accidental asphyxiation. This way, my son wouldn't have to bear any responsibility. We could just compensate Sophia's family to settle the matter. But was I doing the right thing? Although there was not enough evidence to suggest murder or manslaughter, the final result was no case filed. James took my son back to the station to finish his statement and then brought him home that day, repeatedly comforting him with my condolences. My wife finally breathed a sigh of relief. She somehow found a fire basin and had our son step over it to ward off any bad luck. I reminded them, just because the police aren't suspicious for now doesn't mean this matter is over. If Sophia's family pursues it, they can still take us to court. We must handle the aftermath properly and compensate as necessary. My son grinned. Dad, don't worry. Sophia's parents are already dead. They died in a car accident 3 years ago. The only family she has left is her grandfather, who's senile and poses no threat. I was very displeased with my son's arrogant attitude. I believed he should at least show some remorse to be worthy of the girl he had killed. But with my wife shielding him, I couldn't get angry. The next day, James called to inform me that he had contacted Sophia's grandfather, John. My wife and I rushed to the station. The old man had white hair, was simply dressed, and his eyes were squinted as if he were about to fall asleep. I expressed my apologies to John and emphasized that Sophia's death was an accident and that no one should be held responsible. John, probably due to his age, seemed a bit senile. He alternated between telling us how kind and understanding Sophia was and asking who we were and where he was. My wife couldn't help but laugh, and I glared at her. Even so, Sophia was Jack's girlfriend, so we will do everything we can to compensate you. Typically, the death compensation is calculated at 20 times the per capita disposable income, which means we should compensate John with $60,000. Honestly, this amount is trivial for a human life, so even if the old man asked for $1 million, I wouldn't haggle. But John asked for $5 million. I was dumbfounded, and my wife couldn't help but sneer. $5 million? Old man, you couldn't spend that much even if you tried. John wasn't angry. He smiled and said, Sophie cared deeply about the children in the mountains. Her dream was to teach in the remote areas, and I want to fulfill her dream. James also tried to persuade him, but John was adamant. $5 million, not a penny less, or he wouldn't sign the settlement. I had no choice but to pull my wife aside and ask if there was any way to raise $5 million. My wife glared at me. Are you crazy? Give $5 million to an old man? How will our son get married in the future? I understood that John was being exorbitant, but the urgent need was to close the case quickly and cremate Sophia's body. The longer it dragged on, the more unpredictable it became. My wife reluctantly said she needed to make a few calls and went into the bathroom, seemingly not wanting me to overhear. I was curious about how my wife would raise the money, so I went to the men's restroom in the police station. The men's and women's restrooms share a ventilation duct. I turned on the recording function on my phone and slid it into the duct leading to the women's restroom. What I heard shocked me. My wife was borrowing money from our son. Jack, Mom, what's wrong? Baby, that old man is asking for $5 million. What do we do? No worries. The priority now is to clear me of charges. We can figure out the money later. I'll transfer $5 million to you right away. I was stunned. Jack had that much money. $5 million. I could never earn that much in my lifetime. When I thought about the $10,000 I gave him, which included $2,000 borrowed from colleagues, I felt like a clown. To avoid raising my wife's suspicion, I left the restroom and pretended to ask if she had managed to borrow the money. She feigned exhaustion and said she made several calls and finally borrowed $5 million from her mother. I didn't expose her lie. John took the money and promptly signed the settlement and letter of forgiveness, then took his granddaughter's body away. Although Jack successfully avoided charges, my nightmare had just begun because I suspected my son might be involved in illegal activities. How else could a high school student easily come up with millions of dollars? Moreover, Sophia's death might be linked to Jack's crimes. The girl probably knew something or had evidence against Jack, which is why he decided to kill her. If that's the case, it was not manslaughter but outright murder. I was deeply troubled. Jack is my son, and I love him dearly. I would sacrifice my life to protect him. But if I ignored Jack's crimes, more people could be harmed, and I couldn't let that happen. I decided to continue investigating and uncover the truth. To verify Jack and Sophia's relationship, I contacted their teachers. The teacher confidently confirmed Jack and Sophia were indeed a couple, and they got along very well. As teachers, we usually don't support students dating, but Jack and Sophia were the top students in their class. They were very smart and didn't let it affect their studies, so we turned a blind eye. Was Sophia's performance good too? Yes, Jack was strong in science, but Sophia always scored full marks in English, but she underperformed in the college entrance exam, especially in English, scoring only 40-something. We all found it hard to believe. This was indeed strange. English is not like math or physics, unless you guess wildly. The scores are usually stable. For Sophia, who always scored full marks, it was almost impossible to underperform. I could only guess that this anomaly was somehow related to Jack. But why did he do it? What was his motive? I decided to visit the hotel where Sophia died again to find out what happened that day. Strangely, as soon as I entered, the staff drove me out, saying I was on the blacklist and they couldn't serve me. I had to show my police badge and demand the hotel provide surveillance footage to assist in the investigation, but they claimed a technical malfunction had erased all footage. I circled the outside and finally found a blind spot in the surveillance. Climbing up the air conditioner unit, I sneaked into the building through a small window. To my astonishment, the hotel had completely gutted the room where the incident occurred. Furniture, carpets, wallpaper, and even the bathroom tiles and ceiling had all been removed. Now, there was no evidence left, and the crime scene had vanished, making it impossible to investigate. I thought backward. Jack couldn't have orchestrated the hotel's evidence destruction alone. Only the hotel owner could do that. So, I searched online for the hotel's ownership information and found an important clue. The hotel owner was Robert, the father of one of Jack's friends. We had met at the PTA meetings, and I had even been to his villa as a guest. I decided to pay Robert a visit. To avoid seeming rude, I called him first, expressing my intention. Robert was very polite and said he and his son were at home and welcomed me anytime. I drove there, rang the doorbell, but got no response. I called Robert several times, but he didn't answer. At that moment, I noticed the door was slightly ajar, so I took it upon myself to enter. Suddenly, a strong smell of blood hit me. I grabbed an umbrella by the door for self-defense, but there was no movement inside. Cautiously, I walked into the living room. The room had a crystal chandelier hanging from the second floor to the first. It was said that each crystal piece was from Swarovski, worth over $1 million. Now, the chandelier had crashed down on Robert and his son. Shards of expensive crystal, mixed with their sticky brain matter, were scattered everywhere. I called the police, and shortly after, James arrived with two colleagues. The three of them were stunned at the crime scene. "Master, why are you here again?" Wait, why did I say again? I made up an excuse about Robert wanting to discuss his son's education, and then this tragedy happened. Fortunately, Robert's villa had a security system with cameras aimed at the living room. We reviewed the footage about half an hour earlier. Robert and my son were sitting in the living room playing games when the chandelier suddenly fell, with terrifying consequences. James examined the chandelier's base. Several bolts had snapped, and their surfaces were heavily corroded. "Master, let me explain my reasoning. See if I'm right. This chandelier is very heavy. The renovation workers attached it to the villa's steel structure to prevent the bolts from falling out. The problem is, the building used high-carbon steel, and the chandelier bolts were stainless steel. When these two metals contact, they undergo galvanic corrosion, leading to bolt failure. So, this was undoubtedly an accident." I patted James on the shoulder. "You're quite the thinker, just like a true detective." James was proud. "Don't worry, even if I become the chief one day, you'll always be my master." I smiled but stayed silent. In reality, James' reasoning was entirely wrong. High-carbon steel and stainless steel do undergo galvanic corrosion, but the construction workers would have considered that it wouldn't cause a failure for decades. Moreover, the breakpoints on the bolts were so clean that they looked more like they had been cut or caused by small-scale directional explosions. This meant Robert and his son died in a meticulously planned murder. But I didn't share my reasoning because there was only one suspect: my son, Jack. To be honest, I had no evidence proving Jack was the murderer, but he had plenty of motive. Robert and his son might have been involved in Sophia's death, or they wouldn't have helped Jack destroy evidence. They were killed by the chandelier just before I visited. This couldn't be a coincidence. Someone wanted them dead to keep them from talking. I shivered when had my son become such a monster. Just then, James made a clicking sound. "Such a shame. Such a shame." I was puzzled. "What's a shame?" James held up an acceptance letter. This kid had just been accepted to Stanford, and now he's dead. Can you believe it? I couldn't believe it either. I took the letter and saw it was indeed from Stanford University for Charles, but I remembered Charles was a poor student. Sophia was a top student, yet she scored poorly in the exam. It didn't make sense. Charles, a poor student, got into Stanford. I realized there must be something wrong with their exam results, so I called the teacher. Though exams can be unpredictable, Charles' case is unique in my years of teaching. Maybe he got lucky. The teacher's explanation was understandable, as cheating in the college entrance exam seemed impossible. Each exam room has 30 students from different schools and classes, so it's hard for strangers to collude. Even if someone cheats, they would be reported. The invigilators are randomly assigned to exam rooms just before the exam, and different subjects have different invigilators. Plus, there are patrol officers and electronic surveillance. Cheating seems impossible, but my years of police experience told me no system is perfect. Every system has loopholes because they are designed by humans, and humans make mistakes. To prove my theory, I went to the school and obtained all the students' scores and exam room assignments. I found that not only Charles, but several students with average scores suddenly excelled in the college entrance exam. It was miraculous. Interestingly, these students, including Charles, were all in the same exam room, and this exam room was where Jack and Sophia were assigned. Cold sweat ran down my back. If Jack discovered a loophole in the exam system and used it for profit, he could easily make millions, not just a few $100,000. But this was undoubtedly a crime, and an unforgivable one at that. I immediately called Jack, hoping to persuade him to turn himself in, but he didn't answer. I rushed home to find my son. My wife told me that about an hour ago, Jack had packed his things and left, saying he was going on a trip with friends. I found a pair of shoes Jack had left at the door and picked them up. To my surprise, there was something stuck in the sole. Turning it over, I found a piece of crystal, identical to the shards from the chandelier that killed Robert. My hands trembled as I grabbed my wife's wrist. Where is Jack? Why is he avoiding me? Tell me now. My wife's pulse quickened and her pupils dilated, a sign her brain was fabricating a lie. Disappointed in her, I was about to shout when I suddenly heard a strange whistling sound, high-pitched hiss of a pressure cooker safety valve. Are you cooking rice? No. We rushed to the kitchen and found our pressure cooker on the gas stove, heating at full blast. My confused wife was about to turn off the gas when a realization struck me. I dived, pulling her down with me. A second later, the cooker exploded. Sharp metal fragments zipped past my head, piercing the kitchen's glass door and cabinets like a grenade going off. My wife was terrified. I checked her for injuries, but she pointed at me. Honey, you're bleeding a lot. Red liquid trickled into my eyes. I touched my forehead and felt a deep cut from the metal fragment. Though the wound was deep, it hadn't hit any vital areas. The consequences could have been dire. I examined the exploded cooker. Someone had blocked both the safety valve and the safety plug, causing the internal pressure to skyrocket until it exploded. Even the inside of the cooker had diamond-shaped grooves cut into it, making the flying metal fragments sharper. The culprit could only be Jack. Overwhelmed with sadness, I collapsed to the floor, unsure of what to do. The son I had tried so hard to protect had attempted to kill his parents to cover his tracks. This was beyond insanity. At this point, I had to admit I was a failed father, but I still had a duty as a police officer. I bandaged my wound and asked my wife, where is Jack? Frightened by the explosion, my wife tearfully gave me the address. Honey, please bring Jack back. I don't care about him going to a prestigious school anymore. I just want our family to be together. Please, I'm sorry, but I can't make any promises. I'm a police officer first and a father second. Jack was hiding in an office building, which seemed to be his friend William's place. A bunch of burly men in black stood at the entrance, glaring at me. What do you want? I'm here to see my son, Jack. After confirming with someone via walkie-talkie, they allowed me inside. I met William and his father, along with my son, Jack. Jack avoided my gaze, looking guilty. Ed, what happened to your forehead? What's going on? Pretending not to know, I was furious and strode up to slap him. William pulled out a cold M1911 and aimed it at me. Judging by the metal gleam, it was real. Old man, do you know whose territory this is? I could kill you, and no one would find out. If you're going to shoot, go ahead. But know this, if you kill me, your Yale acceptance letter will be worthless. William's face turned pale, and Jack gestured for him to lower the gun. My dad won't hurt me. Let me talk to him. I demanded Jack tell me everything. He nodded. Ed, do you remember when I wanted to buy a pair of the $100 basketball shoes in my freshman year? But at that time, you and mom had just made the down payment on the house. You borrowed money from 8 colleagues, and mom secretly sold her gold jewelry. So, you couldn't even come up with $100, let alone $200. I felt very inferior. In our class, $200 shoes were the cheapest. So, I swore to myself that no matter what, I wouldn't be poor, and I wouldn't let my kids be poor. This thought of making money deeply rooted in Jack's mind and grew. Jack despised manual labor, or selling his physical strength because he was smart. He believed his intelligence would bring him wealth. Unexpectedly, the opportunity came. Once, Charles and William, 2 rich kids, each gave Jack $10,000 to help them cheat in the final exam, and Jack agreed readily. He discreetly passed answers to Charles and William using his phone. He was so covert that the invigilator sitting opposite him didn't notice. This success showed Jack a road to riches. I met many privileged kids through Charles and William. Although their grades were poor, everyone wanted to get into a good university. Studying abroad was too hard, and many didn't want to go. So, I charged each of them $1 million, promising to provide answers during the college entrance exam. These rich kids paid without batting an eye. I was curious. Admission numbers are randomly assigned. How did you ensure they were all in the same exam room? The exam seating system was developed by a third-party company. I bribed a programmer to create a backdoor. Entering our passport numbers would place us in the same room. As for the invigilators, I bribed the entire exam site staff. So, no matter who invigilated, they would turn a blind eye. What about Sophia? What did you need her for? The scoring system has anti-cheating mechanisms. If multiple identical answer sheets appear in one room, the system will alert. So, I needed an equally smart student who would obey me completely. Sophia was perfect. 3 years ago, a car accident almost destroyed Sophia mentally, giving Jack the perfect chance. Initially, he, as class monitor, offered care and support. Later, this help turned into constant companionship and comfort. For Sophia, who had just lost her parents, Jack became her only support. The girl barely emerged from her grief, only to fall into an illusory romance. Even When Jack asked Sophia to help him cheat, she agreed without hesitation, despite knowing it was a crime. If Sophia was your accomplice in cheating, why did she only score 40-something in English? Jack smiled bitterly. I intentionally messed up her answer sheet. The money from cheating was too much to give up. Sophia didn't agree because finishing college was her parents' last wish. After the results came out, Sophia was furious. Despite my apologies, she insisted on reporting it to the education department. If they investigated, we'd be finished. So, Jack decided to silence her. Fearing he couldn't handle Sophia alone, he lured her to a hotel to kill her. The poor girl didn't realize until it was too late when Charles and William, who had been lying in wait, dragged her onto the bed, immobilizing her. She turned her head to beg her lover for help, but Jack slipped a plastic stationery bag over her head, suffocating her in despair and fear. I finally understood Jack's motive for killing Sophia, but why did he murder Charles and even set up a bomb at home to kill us? Jack looked puzzled. Dad, what are you talking about? What bomb? The pressure cooker bomb. Wasn't it you who set it up? Jack shook his head. I was stunned. You didn't kill Robert and his son either. Of course not. They were crushed by the chandelier when I was at their house. I got scared and ran away. At this point, Jack had no reason to lie. So the person who tried to kill me must be someone else. Suddenly, I thought of a possibility and called James. Do you know what John did before he retired? I think he was a coal miner. Oh, and he wasn't American. He's actually Vietnamese. Vietnamese? Yes, he joined the Viet Cong at 11, fought the Americans for over 10 years, and was captured during the Sino-Vietnamese War. He was too afraid to go back, so he stayed in the U.S. I was shocked. John was a seasoned war veteran. This series of murders might be John's revenge. At that moment, I heard a faint click. A window shattered unexpectedly. I turned around and saw a small hole in William's father's chest, with blood gushing out. It was a sniper. I quickly pulled Jack and William behind the sofa. 2 bullets whizzed past, hitting Jack's ear. He clutched his wound. Cursing, I shouted to William. Get the security to cut the power. Without lights, John can't aim. William called the security, and a few minutes later, the power was cut, plunging us into darkness. We sneaked out of the office. William said they had a helicopter on the rooftop for a safe escape. We ran to the rooftop. William was the first to rush out. Suddenly, there was a snapping sound, and William screamed in pain. I turned on my flashlight and saw a bear trap clamped onto his leg. William howled in agony. Quick, get it off. I'm the only one who can fly the helicopter. Jack, terrified, instinctively tried to help William open the trap, but I realized something was wrong with the strap. I pulled Jack back, just as the other end of the chain connected to the trap was yanked, dragging William to the edge of the rooftop and flinging him off from the 30th floor. Jack, terrified by the horrifying scene, stumbled, and I dragged him back into the building to find another way out. I had heard stories about how the Viet Cong used traps and ambushes to inflict heavy losses on well-equipped American soldiers. Seeing it firsthand was terrifying. John must have set other traps, and running blindly would be a death sentence. We had no choice but to confront him head-on. I shouted to expose our location. "Kay, I'm here. If you want to kill me, come on." I shouted a few more times and then took off my jacket, draping it over a coat rack to create a decoy before hiding. As expected, John followed the sound, but couldn't distinguish the decoy and the dart. He fired 2 shots at the coat rack. I jumped at him, wrestling the gun from his hands and fighting him. Though John was experienced, I was stronger. He soon fell to the ground. I pulled out handcuffs and cuffed John. The lights came back on, revealing the old man's broken nose and bloody face, his eyes filled with hatred. I felt remorse. If not for Jack, this old man wouldn't have had to relive his killing schemes. We turned a good man into a vengeful beast. Jack, clutching his ear, picked up John's rifle and jammed it into his mouth, shouting, "Dad, kill him." I couldn't take it anymore. Haven't you killed enough people? If we don't kill him, he might inform the police. I tried to grab the rifle, but Jack struck me with the butt and aimed the gun at me. At that moment, my heart sank. "Son, you're so brilliant. Why ruin your bright future?" Jack retorted. "What future? Even if I get into Harvard, what job will I get? Will I end up a small-town cop like you? I have the talent to change the world, but because you're ordinary, I have to be a wage slave forever. Do you expect me to accept that fate? You parents are the selfish ones, just to satisfy your biological urges. You brought me into this world. I hate you." As Jack raged, John suddenly headbutted Jack, knocking him out. I found something good was the code M1911. As Jack aimed at me, I fired. Bang! The police arrested John, who confessed to everything, leading to a life sentence. At the detention center, I visited John one last time to apologize. John smiled bitterly. I wasn't a good father either. My son once stole something, and we both knelt in front of the store to apologize. Though we've only met a few times, I believe you're a good man at heart. I've lost everything, but you still have a chance. Cherish it. The bailiffs led him to the prison transport. John patted my shoulder as he left. Leaving the detention center, my wife was waiting in the car. She frowned. "Why did it take so long? Didn't you just say a few words? He's not your dad." I smiled bitterly and turned to my son in the back seat. "Sorry to keep you waiting." "It's okay, Dad. This book is great, so I'd wait for you forever." Jack held up a picture book, titled, "Guess How Much I Love You." The doctor told me that my bullet had damaged Jack's hippocampus. Although he survived, he lost all his memories and his intellect regressed to that of a 6-year-old. But no matter what, he's still my son. I still love him, just as I always have. This is a short story, and it ends here. I update my stories daily, so if you like them, please subscribe.